May 28, 1845. The Thames River, London. Two ships depart for the Arctic, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. 129 men. Officers in dress uniforms. Crowds waving from the docks. 3 years of preserved food. Steam engines. Central heating. The finest ice-reinforced hulls the Royal Navy ever built. The mission: find the Northwest Passage. The prediction: they'll be home in 2 years, celebrated as heroes. July 1859. 14 years later. A search party finds a stone cairn on King William Island, 2,300 miles northwest of London. Inside, a single piece of paper. 2 notes written 1 year apart. The first note, dated May 1847, says the expedition is doing well. Supplies intact. Morale high. All is proceeding as planned. The second note, dated April 1848, is written in the margin of the same paper. 9 officers dead, including the expedition leader. Both ships abandoned in the ice. 105 men attempting to march south toward a trading post 600 miles away. The note ends mid-sentence. No one from the expedition was ever seen alive again. This is the story of how an expedition that had everything it needed to survive became one of history's most analyzed disasters. Not because of what they lacked, because of what they trusted. The Northwest Passage. In 1845, it was the last unmapped route on Earth that mattered. A sea route through the Arctic, connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific, cutting thousands of miles off trade routes to Asia. Explorers had been trying to find it for 300 years. Most failed. Many died. But by the 1840s, the British Admiralty believed the time had come. Technology had advanced. Ships were stronger. Food preservation was better. Navigation instruments were more accurate. And Britain had something no previous expedition had: experience. Dozens of Arctic voyages, decades of data, officers who had survived polar winters. Sir John Franklin was chosen to lead. Age 59. Veteran of 2 previous Arctic expeditions. Experienced, cautious, respected. He was given command of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, 2 ships that had already proven themselves in the Antarctic under James Clark Ross. These weren't exploration vessels. They were fortresses. Each ship had reinforced hulls with double-planked oak and iron plating. Steam engines that could power the ships through ice without wind. Railway locomotive engines retrofitted for naval use. Central heating systems using hot water pipes. Libraries with over 1,200 books. Officers' quarters with mahogany furniture, china, silverware. The ships even had daguerreotype cameras and a hand organ that played 50 tunes. And food. 33,000 pounds of preserved meat. 1,000 pounds of raisins. 580 gallons of pickles. 4,200 gallons of liquor. All packed in tin-plated cans, sealed using the latest preservation method developed by a London supplier named Stephen Goldner. These cans were considered a technological breakthrough. They could keep food edible for years. The Admiralty calculated that with standard rationing, the expedition had enough food for 3 years. If rationed conservatively, 5 years. No expedition in history had been better supplied. On May 19, 1845, the ships left Greenhithe. On May 28, they passed through the Thames estuary. The last confirmed sighting of the ships was in late July 1845, by a whaling vessel near Baffin Bay, Greenland. The whalers reported that Franklin and his men were in good spirits, waiting for the ice to clear so they could continue west. After that, silence. Here's what the Admiralty expected to happen. The ships would sail northwest through Lancaster Sound, then navigate through the maze of Arctic islands, following channels that previous expeditions had partially mapped. They would winter in the ice. This was standard. Arctic ice freezes solid from October to June, trapping any ship in place. The plan was to winter once, maybe twice, then break through and complete the passage. The supplies were calculated for this. 3 winters maximum. The food would last. The ships were heated. The men were experienced. But here's the flaw in that logic, and this is the hidden mechanism that runs through the entire Franklin disaster. When you design a system for strength, you often build in a hidden vulnerability. Not because the system is weak, Because confidence in the system changes how you use it. Let me explain this as an expedition planner would. If you're sailing into the Arctic with 1 year of food, you're cautious. You take every opportunity to hunt. You trade with indigenous populations. You ration strictly. You retreat early if conditions worsen. Scarcity makes you flexible. But if you have 3 years of food and the best ships ever built, you make different decisions. You trust the plan. You stay longer in bad positions assuming the supplies will carry you through. You ignore warning signs because the system says you're safe. You don't adapt because you don't think you need to. This is the primary hidden mechanism of the Franklin expedition. It wasn't undersupplied. It was overconfident. And that confidence was built into the supply system itself, specifically, into the 8,000 tin cans that were supposed to keep them alive. Let's reconstruct what likely happened, based on evidence found over the next 170 years. 1845 summer. The expedition sails through Baffin Bay and enters Lancaster Sound. This part goes as planned. By September, they've traveled farther west than expected. They're making good progress. Then the ice closes in. This is normal. They find a protected position near Beechey Island and prepare to winter. Winter 1845 to 1846. The ships are locked in ice from September to June. The men survive the winter. But 3 crew members die. John Torrington, John Hartnell, and William Brain. All 3 are buried on Beechey Island with wooden grave markers. Cause of death, according to later autopsies conducted on the preserved bodies in 1984, pneumonia and tuberculosis. But the autopsies also found something else, abnormally high levels of lead in their bones and soft tissue. This detail becomes critical later. Summer 1846. The ice breaks. The expedition continues southwest. They sail down Peel Sound, a route no European ship has taken before. By September 1846, they're off the northwest coast of King William Island, farther south and west than any previous expedition. They're close to completing the passage. Maybe 500 miles from the known channels on the Pacific side. This is extraordinary progress. But then the ice closes again. And this time it doesn't open. The ships are trapped. Not near shore. Not in a protected harbor. They're stuck in the open ice of Victoria Strait, exposed, immobile. And the ice doesn't melt in summer 1847. This is unusual but not unheard of. Arctic ice is unpredictable. Some years, channels stay frozen for multiple seasons. So they wait. They still have food. The ships are heated. The note written in May 1847, the one found 12 years later, says all is well. But by June 11, 1847, Sir John Franklin is dead. Cause unknown. He's buried at sea according to naval tradition. Command passes to Captain Francis Crozier, an experienced Arctic officer who had served under Franklin before. Summer 1847 comes and goes. The ice doesn't break. Winter 1847 to 1848. This is the second full winter trapped in the ice. By now, the food situation is still manageable, but morale is declining. More men are dying. The note dated April 22, 1848, records that 24 men total are now dead, 9 officers and 15 crew. That's nearly 20% of the expedition. April 22, 1848. Captain Crozier makes the decision to abandon the ships. All 105 surviving men leave Erebus and Terror behind and begin marching south across the ice toward the Canadian mainland. The plan is to reach the Back River, follow it south to a Hudson's Bay Company trading post called Fort Resolution, over 600 miles away. They never make it. So here's the question. Why did they abandon the ships? This is one of the most debated decisions in exploration history. The ships still had food. They had shelter. They had heating systems. Walking 600 miles across Arctic terrain, dragging supplies on sledges in sub-zero temperatures, is far more dangerous than staying on the ships. But they left. And here's the evidence for why. Evidence 1, the lead poisoning. When the bodies of Torrington, Hartnell, and Brain were exhumed in 1984, forensic analysis showed lead levels 10 times higher than normal. Lead causes cognitive impairment, fatigue, irritability, and poor decision-making. The source: the tin cans. The solder used to seal the cans was 90% lead. The cans were sealed hastily, under pressure to meet the expedition's departure deadline. In many cans, the lead solder was applied to the inside seam, in direct contact with the food. The men were being poisoned slowly, every time they ate. Evidence 2: the second note. The handwriting in the April 1848 note is erratic, hurried, disorganized. Words are misspelled. The note provides almost no detail about why the ships were abandoned or what the plan is. This suggests impaired judgment. Evidence 3: items found along the march route. In the 1850s and 1860s, search parties and Inuit hunters found sledges abandoned on the ice. On those sledges, silverware, books, a writing desk, brass curtain rods, a backgammon board, and heavy wooden boats. The men were dragging luxury items across the ice while starving. One sledge, found near Erebus Bay, contained a lifeboat weighing 800 pounds. Inside the boat, 2 skeletons, 5 pocket watches, silk handkerchiefs, scented soap, and 40 pounds of chocolate. But no functional cold weather gear. No hunting tools. This is evidence of cognitive impairment. Healthy men don't carry soap and silk when they're dying of hunger and cold. Evidence 4: Inuit testimony. In the 1850s, explorer John Ray interviewed Inuit families living near King William Island. They reported seeing groups of white men starving walking south. The Inuit offered to help, offered to teach them to hunt seal, to fish through ice, to build snow shelters. The men refused. Some Inuit said the men seemed confused, unable to make decisions. The Inuit also reported finding bodies later. Near some bodies, evidence of cannibalism. Cut marks on bones, consistent with defleshing. This was confirmed by forensic analysis of remains found in the 1980s and 1990s. The cannibalism wasn't ritual. It was survival in the final stage of starvation. So here's the midpoint twist. The thing that makes this case worth studying 180 years later. The Franklin expedition didn't fail because the Arctic was too harsh. They failed because their technological advantage became a hidden liability. The tin cans that were supposed to be their greatest asset, 3 years of preserved food, were slowly poisoning them. The lead accumulated in their bodies over 2 years. By the time they abandoned the ships, they weren't thinking clearly. They made irrational decisions. They dragged heavy, useless items. They refused help from people who knew how to survive in that environment. The system designed to make them invincible made them vulnerable. And here's the secondary mechanism: cultural overconfidence. The Royal Navy believed that British technology and discipline were superior to indigenous knowledge. The Inuit had lived in the Arctic for thousands of years. They knew how to hunt seal, how to build ice shelters, how to read weather, how to survive winters with no stored food. But the Franklin expedition brought mahogany desks and silverware instead of learning from the people who lived there. That overconfidence is what separates this from other Arctic disasters. It's not a tragedy of bad luck. It's a tragedy of ignoring context. Let me show you the one detail that captures this perfectly. In 1859, when searchers found skeletal remains along the march route, they also found something else. A silver serving platter, engraved with an officer's name. It weighed 4 pounds. And it was found next to the body of a man who had died of starvation. A starving man walking across the ice, carrying a 4-pound silver platter. That's not about food. That's about identity. The officers of the Royal Navy believed that maintaining discipline and decorum, the rituals of rank, the symbols of status, would somehow protect them. Even when the system was failing, they clung to its symbols. The platter proves they didn't adapt. They didn't abandon the rules of the world they came from, even when those rules didn't work in the world they were in. Now let's talk about what we know versus what we don't. Here's what the evidence proves. The ships were trapped in ice for at least 2 winters, possibly 3. Lead poisoning from the food cans caused cognitive decline. The men abandoned the ships in April 1848. They marched south. None survived. Remains were found scattered across King William Island and Adelaide Peninsula. Forensic analysis confirms malnutrition, scurvy, lead poisoning, hypothermia, and evidence of cannibalism in the final stages. Here's what the evidence does not prove. Why Captain Crozier chose to abandon the ships in April 1848 instead of waiting one more summer for the ice to break. Whether the ships could have been saved if the crew had stayed. What happened to the ships after abandonment? Erebus and Terror weren't found until 2014 and 2016, using sonar scans. Both ships sank, but it's unclear when or how. And there's a contested detail, the lead poisoning hypothesis. Some researchers argue that while lead was present, it wasn't the primary cause of death. They point to other factors: scurvy from lack of vitamin C, botulism from improperly sealed cans, pneumonia, tuberculosis. They argue that lead poisoning alone wouldn't cause total expedition failure. So let's look at two plausible explanations. Explanation 1. Lead poisoning was the primary cause of failure. The gradual accumulation of lead over 2 years caused cognitive impairment that led to fatal decisions. Abandoning the ships, dragging useless items, refusing Inuit help. Evidence supporting this: forensic analysis showing extreme lead levels, erratic handwriting in the 1848 note, irrational behavior documented by Inuit witnesses. Explanation 2. Lead poisoning was a contributing factor but not the sole cause. The expedition failed due to a combination of bad ice years, disease, poor leadership decisions after Franklin's death, and cultural inability to adapt to indigenous survival methods. Evidence supporting this: other Arctic expeditions also experienced lead exposure without total failure. Scurvy and starvation can explain most of the symptoms, and the decision to march south might have been a calculated risk based on deteriorating ship conditions. The limitation of both explanations: we don't have detailed medical records and cognitive impairment is difficult to prove from fragmented historical evidence. What's certain is that technology failed them, but so did flexibility. So what do we learn from the Franklin expedition? Lesson 1. Advantage in one context can become liability in another. The tin cans were cutting-edge food preservation. In a normal environment they worked. But in the Arctic, where every decision matters and cognitive sharpness is survival, slow lead poisoning was fatal. The better your tools, the more you need to understand their limits. This is still true today. We build systems assuming they'll work as designed. But every system has an edge case where it fails silently. Lesson 2. Confidence in your system can make you blind to alternatives. The Franklin expedition had a plan. The plan was based on proven technology and decades of experience. But when the plan stopped working, when the ice didn't break, they didn't adapt. They didn't hunt. They didn't learn from the Inuit. They didn't abandon the luxury items. They trusted the system until it killed them. Flexibility matters more than preparation. Lesson 3. The people who live in the environment know something you don't. The Inuit tried to help. They offered food, guidance, survival knowledge. The men refused. This isn't just about the Arctic. It's about expertise. The Royal Navy had technical knowledge. The Inuit had contextual knowledge. Technical knowledge is powerful, but it's not universal. If you're entering an unfamiliar system, geographic, cultural, professional, the people already there know things that no amount of preparation teaches you. Ignoring them is arrogance. The Franklin expedition remains one of the most studied disasters in exploration history. Between 1848 and 1859, over 30 search expeditions were launched, funded by the British government and by Franklin's widow, Lady Jane Franklin. The searches mapped more of the Arctic than Franklin's expedition ever did. The Northwest Passage was finally navigated successfully in 1906 by Roald Amundsen, using a small, flexible ship and a crew of 6. Amundsen survived by doing what Franklin didn't: learning from the Inuit. In 1984, Dr. Owen Beatty led a team to exhume the bodies of the 3 sailors buried on Beechey Island. The bodies were nearly perfectly preserved by permafrost. The lead analysis from those autopsies reshaped the entire historical understanding of the disaster. In 2014, a Canadian search team found HMS Erebus, intact on the seafloor in 36 feet of water. In 2016 they found HMS Terror 45 miles away, also intact. Both wrecks are now protected archaeological sites. Divers have recovered artifacts: plates, bottles, navigation instruments. The ships are frozen in time just like the men who left them. In 2024, a new forensic study analyzed bone collagen from remains found near Erebus Bay. The study concluded that the lead poisoning, while severe, was likely compounded by zinc deficiency and scurvy. The cans weren't just poisoning them, they were failing to provide enough nutrition even when sealed properly. The final note found in 1859 remains the last written communication from any member of the expedition. It's on display at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. If you look closely at the handwriting, you can see the deterioration between the 1847 entry and the 1848 entry. The first is neat, confident, optimistic. The second is cramped, unsteady, desperate. That difference, between confidence and desperation, between plan and reality, is the entire story. One question remains. What did the men think in the final days? We know from Inuit testimony that some groups were seen still walking south weeks after abandoning the ships. Starving. Frostbitten. Carrying items that made no sense. One group was seen trying to drag a boat across the ice in summer, when the ice was breaking up and they could have sailed it. There's no record of what they said. No final letters. No diaries recovered from the march route. But here's what we know about humans under extreme stress and cognitive decline. They cling to the last thing that made sense. For the Franklin expedition, that was the plan. The ships. The structure. The Royal Navy. They couldn't let go of the identity that defined them, even when it stopped protecting them. That's not weakness. That's human. The tragedy isn't that they died. People die in the Arctic. The tragedy is that they didn't have to. They had time. They had resources. They had neighbors who could teach them. But they couldn't see past the system they trusted. And that's the lesson that lasts 180 years later. The strongest systems can fail. The best plans can break. And when they do, survival belongs to the people who adapt, not the people who insist the plan still works. That's the file history left in the ice. I'll see you in the next one.